In that scenario, that's where I want it to then go up to a higher shutter speed, right? I prefer to compromise on the look to be able to make sure that the shutter speed is not overexposing. So GoPro Hero 8 has been released, and apparently they start shipping out as of yesterday, which was the 15th, and should be in stores on the 20th, which is this weekend. But there's one thing that it doesn't do, which I'm really kind of disappointed about. Now, the thing about an action camera is it has no aperture, so you can't adjust the amount of light that is coming in. The only thing we can do is adjust what we do with the light. The other two parts that we can adjust is the ISO and the shutter speed. But the issue with being an action camera is you're not seeing what's going into the camera at the time because it's mounted on the side of the helmet, you can't see the back of it, etc. Now, just to set some context, I use ProTunes for everything because I like to get a certain look on my films. I hate when you see fast moving stuff and every frame is perfectly still, right? To me, that just doesn't make sense. Like that, when you're watching a film that's been made with a really high shutter speed and the subject is moving, I should see some blur, I should see some movement. So when it doesn't do that, it looks odd to me. The thing about the GoPros though, is they do tend to, if you've got it all in auto mode, really only capture things in high shutter speeds. You know, by default, they try and make it suitable to everyone. Now the thing about the GoPros is you need to specifically set a lower shutter speed to be able to do that, or you have to set the ISO really low in order to do that. Which brings up two problems of choosing one of those two. If I lock in a shutter speed, I have the risk of overexposing, and if I lock in the ISO, then I have the risk of underexposing, right? To be able to try and get to a specific shutter speed. So, for example, on the motorbike, I know that if I shoot in 24 frames per second, then actually a shutter speed of 96 works really well. Like 48 is actually too slow. There's too much movement, too much blur. And then when we were skiing, 48 was actually really perfect, but that scenario had a major issue. So you'll notice all those shots, they're all overexposed. Right, and the reason is because even though I've put an ND filter on to reduce the amount of light that was coming in, the shutter speed was still too slow and then nothing adjusted when it overexposed. All of that to give you context, the one thing I'd love the GoPros to do, and I don't understand why they don't do it because it's technically really easy to do, is have a preferred shutter speed. Right, so in that scenario when I was skiing, I could have said, I want to shoot at 24 frames per second and I want the shutter to be at 48. Shoot at that where you can, and then when it overexposes, allow it to go up to a higher shutter speed. Because what it normally does is it sends the ISO up way too early. You end up with a high shutter speed and a high ISO. You're either locking in a shutter speed and there's nothing you can do about it if it over or underexposes, or you're putting it in full auto mode and you don't get the look that you want because you can't adjust anything. So, all right, let me just explain that one a little bit better. So what I want to be able to do is set the shutter speed to a specific speed and then open up the ISO range. When it's highlight, sometimes what I do is I lock in the ISO to like 100 and 100, so then it can't move, so then it picks the slowest shutter speed by default. Now what I want instead is to be able to open up the ISO range so it can move around within that range, but have a shutter speed that's kind of locked in but not locked, if you know what I mean. So say if it's a reasonably sunny day outside, say I'm on the motorbike, so I'm going in and out of shadows and stuff like that, I want to set my frame rate to 24 frames per second so I get a nice sort of cinematic look. So therefore I want my shutter speed at 48 because it gets a lot of movement. But if I then lock in my ISO, then I've got nowhere to move, right? So I want to be able to open up the ISO so then it can move around within that range and then put the ND filter on so that it ends up somewhere in the middle of the ISO range, right? Therefore, the ISO is what's moving around to be able to get the right exposure, right? But in that scenario, then when you go out into the bright light and the ISO is all the way down at 100, it can't go any lower, but your shutter speed is still too slow to be able to stop the amount of light that's coming in, so therefore it will overexpose. In that scenario, that's where I want it to then go up to a higher shutter speed, right? I prefer to compromise on the look to be able to make sure that the shutter speed is not overexposing. That's where I want that preferred shutter speed. So I'm kind of saying here, where possible, while you're working within the ISO range, but as soon as we move outside of that ISO range, then let the shutter speed control the exposure. That's what I'm thinking. It's a nice little feature. I think it'd be a really great thing if GoPro could add that in, because in reality, there's no hardware changes in any of that. There's actually nothing in that that's not programmable within the firmware. It's just a matter of adding another option, whether that just be a tick box somewhere that says preferred shutter speed or locked in shutter speed. Yeah, UI guys can figure that one out, but it's a nice, easy win that I think would make a big difference to a lot of people like me who like to go for a certain look in the film and like to be able to get a little bit cinematic with the GoPros. Anyway, that's just a thought. I think that would be great. One of the things I really love about the new Hero 8 is that it has the presets. That's amazing. Like this is one of those usability things that just changes your world. If you're shooting people, you want one setup, and you're shooting skiing, you want a different setup. So to be able to quickly jump between them is brilliant. I love that. Some parts of it I'm not looking forward to, but anyway, that's a separate thing. But for now, GoPro, please, preferred shutter speed. If you want to know more, come and ask me, but it'd just be a great feature, I think. It'd be amazing. Anyway, stay safe, have fun, see you guys.